Well, hello everyone. Welcome to this new edition of the weekly webcast of the Objector Church. Today's date is February 10th, 2019, and we are so excited that you've come to join us. If you're watching live on Facebook, just want to remind you we'd love to get your comments along the way. You can post them if you go on Facebook, wherever you're seeing this live. Oh, let me mute myself. Okay, there we go. You can post comments along the way as you have thoughts, questions. We love interaction. By the way, we want to welcome Serena and Rebecca, my wife. Thank you so much for tuning in. Very excited both of you are with us. And for others who are out there, please feel free to join in at any time. Also, just a reminder that if you're watching this recorded later on, all of our programs, we do usually about a day or so later, we will have them posted both in video archive form, but we're also now transitioning over to having an audio podcast as well. So all of that is coming. And you can find out more information about that at the church website at objector.church. So for anyone, though, who is new, the Objector Church, we are a religious humanist community. We are interfaith in nature, meaning that we are open to people of a variety of different religious and philosophical traditions. We deal with the ultimate questions of meaning, identity, ethics that religious folks do, but we come at this from a humanist perspective, meaning we believe that humans are the driver's seat of their own destiny. And that while we often will look to different religious traditions for what we can learn from them, as a community, as a whole, we're not taking positions on whether one tradition is right or wrong. Rather, we are seeking to find truth wherever we can and affirming the rights of individuals within our community and not within our community to practice what they believe. And finally, we are a peace-based community. In other words, we emphasize peace and social justice issues because we are all together here on planet Earth. We got to make this work. So anyway, though, for all of our weekly webcasts, we always have a mix of the three I's: inspiration, information, and hopefully a bit of interaction. And so for this week, for inspiration information, it'll be a blend of both. I want to talk about a topic that's been on my mind a lot lately, and is the issue of life cycle celebrations and rituals and what they mean in different contexts. And for me, part of the reason this has come up in my thinking a lot is that I am the father. Oh, by the way, thank you, babe. Wife just said I was able to see you today, first time live. So, woo, that's pretty awesome. A lot of times the program's airing time she can't watch live. So, anyway, but I've been thinking about the issue of rituals and life cycles a lot lately because I'm the father, or I guess more accurately, stepfather of a 12-year-old boy. And 12-year-olds in many religious traditions around the world, this is a time of coming of age, of initiation. And it's interesting, if you look at religions, uh, traditional beliefs all around the world, many of them have similar rituals and practices. They look very different, but they still often happen at these same times. We see a variety of life cycle rituals at the beginning of life with birth. Practices such as circumcision, baby namings, things like this. In some parts of the Christian tradition, there's the idea of a baptism or sometimes of a baby dedication. The key here is almost every religion has these kind of things at the beginning of life. Later on, many traditions have other cycles, such as coming of age, coming into puberty, for both boys and girls. And there's different gendered ways this plays out in different contexts, cultural and religious, but there's often rituals. The most famous, probably in the Jewish tradition, is the bar or bat mitzvah, becoming a son or daughter of the covenant. But other traditions have very similar practices. And then moving into young adulthood, there's often another set of rituals of initiating someone into the full life of adult community. And then we move forward to other life cycle events, such as entering into long-term relationships. And in many, many cultures, pretty much all of them that I know of, there's some concept of a wedding, some context of a commitment ceremony, a beginning a covenant relationship. You might call it marriage, you might call it something different, but this concept is present. As far as I know, in just about every world religion and tradition has some concept like that. And then some traditions also have rituals regarding the ending of that kind of relationship. The Jewish tradition is what I'm most familiar with, the tradition of the get, but other traditions have similar things. And then there are other rituals as well. Of course, we think it towards the end of life, funerals, wakes, memorials, but there's also a lot of other kinds of rituals. And I became aware of some of these other kinds of rituals from an author by the name of Richard Rohr. And if you're not familiar with him, his name, I'm gonna type it up here on our chat for the Facebook Live for this week. Just so you had the spelling of his name. It's Rohr. Richard Rohr, though, he talks a lot about the issues of spirituality, contemplation, but also of action in an activist context. And I've really come to like a lot of his writing. But I'm especially interested by something I heard him say and speak on a little bit, and this would have been goodness, probably 9 years ago. The GI Rights Network, the folks that answer the GI Rights Hotline, we have an annual conference every year. And so at this conference, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Richard Rohr, since he's in that area, came and spoke to us. And he spoke especially about the issue of how the unfinished business of initiation has led many young people to join the military. And then, unfortunately, there is not the traditional context of also transitioning to civilian life. And he argued that many of the psychological problems that come from warfare are because of the lack of appropriate rituals, both for the entering into it and the ending of it. Now, I realize that this may be a little bit out there. We are a peace tradition, the Objector Church. But we also work a lot with people in the military, and so we've seen this. Several of the ministers of the church, we either are involved in working directly with GIs. We do publicity for GIs struggling through different issues. A lot of us involved in this work, so we've encountered a lot of folks across the gamut of the military experience, and so we're not just saying stuff. We're speaking from experience. And what I've seen over and over again is that for many young people who join the military, number one reason they join, of course, is finances, always, or almost always. But secondly, probably the second driving force is a desire to become an adult, to really become an adult. And for many of them, young people will talk about, I wanted more structure in my life. Some of them will talk about wanting to please family members. Some of them speak about their patriotic duty. But all of them is tied up in this sense of the military being something that gives them identity and purpose. Now, Richard Rohr argued that in traditional societies, we're talking about indigenous societies, Native American and other contexts, he spoke about how that many societies that had warfare as a part of their experience, and realistically, human beings, warfare has often been a part of the human experience. But in these traditional societies, there was always this sense of before someone became a warrior, they were initiated into this through various rites and practices. And often we're tied up in these rites of moving from childhood into puberty into adulthood. And these rites, many of them involved, and Richard Rohr, he mostly spoke about this in a gendered context. He saw this as tied up in masculine identity. I haven't read as much about him in recent years how that may have evolved and changed, but I would argue that many of these phenomena I don't think are necessarily gendered in context. But from his perspective, he saw it as is that in these traditional societies, a young man coming into adulthood, there is a process where they not only left mother, but they left the father. And they were initiated into the tribe, into their role as a member of the tribe, as a role as a warrior by the other men of the tribe, not by the father, by other men. And that kind of initiatory event was very important. It often involved rituals of various kinds. It involved this leaving one thing, going to another was very important. But Richard also talked about, though, the idea that many of these traditional societies, they also recognize the psychological, spiritual needs of warfare. were different than the skills and mindset needed for regular life. And so many tribes practiced various purification rituals when the warriors came back home before they entered into the tribe. And what's fascinating for me is that we know of these rituals in a Native American context. We also know about them in the ancient Middle East, particularly again in the Jewish context. We have this from the Hebrew scriptures that talked about various purification rites that warriors would do before they came back into the camp. And I would argue that these kind of concepts were important because they were a way of recognizing the warrior had been through something. They needed time to decompress, to deal with it, particularly in the context of community with others who went through the same kind of trauma. And then they are transitioned back into to their old life, their ordinary life, and yet recognizing that there is an initiation required for this just as much as warfare required. Okay, I talked a lot about how rituals work, why they work, why these such as these life cycle rituals are so important. And we barely scratch the surface. There's many, many other things out there. I've known of people that have had significant rituals, secular or religious, involving retirement, regarding changes of life in various ways, regarding adoption. Certainly, religious conversion is a big one. There's a lot of different things people do rituals for. And certainly in secular arenas, think about high school graduation in rural Oklahoma or suburban to slash rural Oklahoma, where I grew up. The big deal at age 16 was getting your driver's license. That was a rite of passage. Anyway, I guess I'm trying to say is I think that these rites are part of the human experience, and that these rites have power for good or for evil. We know, of course, that there are abusive kinds of ritual practices. We know from examples in various parts of the world that practice, for instance, female genital mutilation. That is not a good kind of ritual practice because it causes lifelong physical, psychological harm. But at the same time, and there's other ritual practices that are not good, that cause harm. And on the other hand, I think sometimes as a society, we have so demythologized ritual that we've lost sight of its importance. And I think there's a lot of young people who are yearning for it. And I think not just young people, I think older folks. And I think this is particularly an issue for people who, for good reason, have rejected the traditional religious values they might have grown up in. A lot of people have changed religions or may have moved away from religion altogether, and often for very, very good reasons, because of significant trauma that they've experienced, because of abuse. This stuff is real. And there's often very good reasons why people check out of the tradition or the religion they grew up in. And you will never hear judgment from me of making that change because it's often a really, really good thing. The problem, though, is that when someone moves away from a tradition they may have been a part of that provided life cycle rituals and whatnot, sometimes the absence of those things is something that is hard. And maybe not for everyone, but I've talked to enough people to know that it is um, is something that for many people is difficult, is having that loss and not having the kind of rituals they'd like. Um, I'll give you one great example. A lot of people, as young adults, have for various reasons moved away from religious understandings of their life. They're now coming to the point of getting married. They are making a lifelong commitment to their chosen partner. This is important. This is significant. They want to invite their family and friends to a special gathering. They want to make it a big deal. The problem is our society is structured where that you could get by default two kinds of marriage. You either have a church or religious marriage that involves all the trappings of religion, or you have the courthouse wedding, which is, to say the least, kind of anticlimactic. A lot of folks do what they can to change the affair. And I'm still, when I think about the days of the early days of the various legalizations and delegalizations of gay marriage in San Francisco, I remember the first time that this happened for a whole day, that they were performing weddings there at City Hall, and in a bit of civil disobedience to the courts for a bit, and how moving that was. And so I don't want to in any way negate the fact that even a courthouse wedding can be meaningful. But at the same time, for many people, it just isn't enough. It makes it feel like it's simply a financial or contractual thing rather than something bigger than that. And so a lot of people have had to be creative to find new ways to do ritual that works for them in the context of weddings. Another big context is in weddings is for people who maybe they are religious, and maybe their partner, spouse to be, is religious too, but maybe they come from different traditions that maybe, according to rules, that the officiants of one tradition won't officiate for interfaith wedding. Or maybe folks who the traditions they grew up in don't work, but they want something. That's a real issue. And so part of the thing of why we started the Objector Church is to provide some of these kinds of services to folks who want something more. And so weddings, of course, is the big one we think about. And for a lot of folks, this is one of the most significant events in their life, maybe the most significant event in life. They want it to be special. And so I want to share with you, and this is for mostly this point geared at for folks in Oklahoma. I love to officiate weddings. I don't get to do near enough of them, but I love to do it any chance I get. And so I want to mention, if you are looking for a wedding officiant, I'm here for you. We have some things. We're still working out some of the things as far as cost and whatnot go. It'll be very affordable, what I can tell you, and we're going to have something that's discounted or free for church members. But this is something we love to do. We also want to throw out there for people that may live elsewhere. Maybe you can't come to Oklahoma to get hitched, but we can be of assistance in helping you to craft your own rituals, to write your own script for whatever that might be. By the way, hello, Cheryl. Thank you for joining us tonight. Those are things that we can help with as well. But also, I'm thinking about other kinds of rituals. And one of the things that again, going back to how I began this webcast, is thinking about coming of age rituals. There's a real need for some good, meaningful coming of age rituals for young people who either are interfaith, bi-religious, who may be more free thinkers generally, and who want the significance of joining, being a part of a community, being initiated into that, but are wanting to do it on their own terms or do it somehow differently than what they've been exposed to. And so that's another thing we want to explore together. I do want to mention, though, that besides us and our ministers, we want to be there to help you as we can. But beyond that, there's also a lot of other resources out there. One of the best ones, and I'm going to pull this up real quick because I love this website. This is from a Jewish context, but many of these rituals would work in other kinds of contexts, not purely Jewish. This website is ritualwell.org, and I'm going to share it right here on our Facebook chat. Ritualwell.org, and it is describes itself as being a website. Let's see, it's actually created by the Reconstructing Judaism movement. What I like about many of their rituals are that they are geared around all kinds of elements of ordinary life. In fact, I'm just going to read you just a little bit of their description because I think they really explain well what they're about. It says, some people wake up every morning with a cup of coffee in the New York Times. Some put their children to bed each night with a story, a song, and a special goodnight kiss. Some families watch football after every Thanksgiving meal. Some friends gather weekly to play poker or talk about books. All of these are rituals. They organize life and give it predictability. They connect us to each other and bring fullness to our lives. Some people light candles every Friday night. Some say a prayer before eating. Some families welcome babies with ancient ceremonies and new blessings. Some friends gather to celebrate Jewish holidays. These too are rituals. They connect us with Jewish time and the Jewish people. They lift us from the ordinary to the sacred. They bring meaning and order to our lives. Ritual helps us pay attention. From the joy of a recovery to the grief of a funeral, ritual helps us inhabit the breadth of human experience. When we engage in ritual, we leave the everyday and enter a space that touches and transforms us in profound and important ways. Okay, there's more I could say here, but what I really like is how the ritual well people are describing it is that ritual works in many ways. It may have things that are purely of a secular nature, they could be religious. The key is the meaning we ascribe to them, which means I think this is a really important part here too. It means that we sometimes need to be the author of our own rituals. Yes, we need to break convention sometimes. We need to be playful and find rituals that mean something to us. Sometimes that may mean rejecting old rituals altogether. Sometimes it may mean writing a new one. Sometimes it means adapting and changing a ritual that is helpful but also problematic. All of those things are on the table. Those are all permissible. So, by the way, for those of you who are watching, I want to take a quick break to mention if you have comments along the way, we'd love to hear them. Sometimes I don't always see all the Facebook Live comments. So if I miss something, Rena or someone else is watching, be sure and ping me if I miss someone joining us. By the way, it looks like an Amanda, I don't see who, let's see. Amanda, thank you so much for tuning in. And we have several folks in tonight. We really appreciate all the live viewers. If you have thoughts, but particularly if you have a question or thought about a ritual either that you've created yourself, a ritual that you wish existed and doesn't exist yet, please post in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts so we can share them with us as a community. Hi, Amanda. So anyway, I like the Ritual Well website because it gives an example of this. There's many other websites out there similar that give a starting place. In fact, I'm just going to look again at the Ritual Well website. One of the things that they have are rituals for the good times, but also for hard times, such as in their categories in their website, under healing and hard times, they have communal tragedy, hard times, healing services, healing from trauma and abuse, healing from illness, on their life cycles. And they have things such as starting a family, welcoming and raising children, sanctifying intimate relationships, gender and sexual identity, rituals for literally coming out of the closet, rituals for choosing and affirming a religious life, rituals for ending relationships, rituals for growing older, rituals for death and mourning. There's just a lot of possible rituals out there. And so I'm using them as an example, but you may have something else. There's other resources out there, lots of them. What I encourage you is to think about what works for you, what works for your family, and to be willing to be playful. And for us at the Objective Church, our goal more than anything is to be a resource center to help you in crafting your own rituals. And we as a community can join in sometimes and celebrate them, particularly if you're part of our local community in Oklahoma. Eventually, we'd love to have a community of people who can gather together for the good times and the bad, to celebrate the wonderful things, to mourn the hard times. That's something we're hoping to build towards, is having an actual local community, but also in the online context, to have these places where we can connect with each other, we can engage in ritual together and reconnect. And so anyway, those are my thoughts for tonight. It was a little bit rambly, I know, but I wanted to introduce this idea because it's something that's been important since the beginning of our foundation of the Objective Church. We haven't talked about it a whole lot yet, but wanted to at least begin this conversation to start exploring what ritual looks like, and particularly, again, what would meaningful ritual look like for folks who are not religious, but still yearn for something from a humanistic perspective. We think those rituals are out there. I've seen some of them. I'd like to start exploring them and experimenting with them. And for folks who may have multiple religious leanings, what would it look like for a Jewish Buddhist person to get married? What would their wedding look like? What about a Christian Hindu? just so many different religious permutations, but we should be, if we are as human beings have diversity within ourselves, then we need to be also have rituals that reflect that level of diversity. So speaking of rituals, and we're trying something a little bit different this week, we have been doing a ritual. We light a candle at the beginning of our time together. Tonight, at the suggestion of one of our members, I'm doing it at the end. Purposefully, one is an example of ritual, but also just as a kind of closing blessing of sorts. And the reading, what I do for this is, one, we have a candle, and I light the candle because this is something of a universal symbol that many traditions have of expression of hopefulness in the midst of darkness, in the midst of difficulties, of expressing hope, and the contrast between light and dark. The candle is something that's warmth, that conveys warmth and comfort, and has been a common religious symbol for many traditions. But I also have a blessing, and I read this. The author of this is Marcia Falk. It's from her book, the Book of Blessings, and these blessings are from a Jewish, more humanistic tradition. So I have a blessing from here. I read a little bit in Hebrew, most of it in English. I change one word to make it a little more universal for our context. So anyway, what I'll do is I'll light the candle. We'll read from this. Also, I got a good question, and so we are going to talk about that after this little ritual. So in the meantime, if you have questions, please feel free to post them as well, and we will have some time for interaction after this candle lighting time. So begin by lighting the candle. And now, Shema kavara la'elhot alfei panim melo olam shekinata ribue panea ekad. Hear, O congregation, the divine abounds everywhere and dwells in everything. The many are one. Loving life in its mysterious source with all my heart and all my spirit, all my senses and strength, I take upon myself and into myself these promises: to care for the earth and those who live upon it, to pursue justice and peace, to love kindness and compassion. I will teach this to our children throughout the passage of the day, as I dwell in my home, and as I go on my journey from the time I rise until I fall asleep. It may my actions be faithful to my words, that our children's children may live to know. Truth and kindness have embraced. Peace and justice have kissed and are one. So may it be. Anyway, that little bit of blessing, that ritual is, and we've chosen this because it uses some of the imagery from religious context, but it has, but it's from a more universalistic, non-theistic kind of idea. A bit of a setting intention of saying these are values that we hold dear. So anyway, so now let's get to some questions. I have a question from Amanda, and she asked, how do we distinguish ritual from routine? That is a really, really, really good question. How I think I would describe this myself, and other folks may have answers too, so feel free to answer as well. We can read that as well. My thinking is that it has to do with intention. Routines may be set intentionally, but they tend to be lived out unintentionally. In other words, if I ever have a routine of, say, eating a certain thing for breakfast or going to work in a certain route, I may at some point think intentionally that, oh, I need to eat a healthy breakfast, or I need an efficient way to work. But there comes a point that it is just a routine I keep following because it's convenient. It's what I've always done. And it's not something that I've invested meaning into. It's rather just something I do. Now, I would argue that routines often do convey values. In other words, even if they are in default, they are still conveying values. And I had a professor in college in a theology class said that you can study theology and have a well thought out theology. You can not study theology, and you're still going to have a theology. It'll just be poorly thought out. His argument was ideas about theology, in this religious context, you're going to have them one way or another. The question is, have you thought it through or not? Well, I would argue the same thing about routines. Routines are going to exist. We all will do them. That's human nature. The question is that are they going to be thought out or not? And that's what, to me, where it switches gears to ritual, because in ritual, we are endowing it with meaning through our own intentions and sometimes the intentions of a community. And so, to me, that would be how I define the difference. Ritual, I would think by its nature, also involves a continual reinvesting of meaning into the ritual. In other words, something that you do on autopilot, even if it was started intention, may move from ritual to routine because there's no new reinvestment in it. On the other hand, when we reinvest the ritual meaning, it's important. I'll give you another example of, to me, how this might play out. I grew up in a Christian tradition, which practiced having communion every week. And the challenge in that tradition was to really engage with it. You had to think about it from different perspectives. There was a mental engagement. It was very difficult to keep doing that week after week after week. But what I was taught was that the ritual only made sense if you continued to bring your energy to the table. Now, I think that's an example, but there's many other rituals that could become routine, could become mundane, but it's by that continual reinvesting that they have purpose. Anyway, that's my thinking. Others may have other thoughts. Okay, I have a comment here from Rebecca, my wife, I should add. She says, as a parent of a child on the spectrum, I have had to find ways to help adapt my child to a world that he really can't adapt to by himself. We have been able to create rituals that help grow his understanding and promote his inner growth and to capitalize on his idiosyncrasies and affirm his uniqueness and make them work for his spiritual growth in ways that the sort of ritual I grew up with might work against him. Yeah, I would agree with everything she said there. And I think part of it is, I think for our whole family, our whole family is somewhere on the autism spectrum. And for all of us that we are really put off, and I think most people on the spectrum are put off by insincerity. And the problem is with a ritual that someone else has prescribed for you, if it doesn't make sense to you, it doesn't make sense, and therefore it loses its meaning. And it can even be a bit of a hindrance or an aggravation, if anything. And I think that's a lot of my feelings about the rituals I grew up with, ended up going in that direction. And so I do think we have to, and I don't think it's just for people on the spectrum. I think a lot of people need ritual, but they need the right kind of ritual. And a lot of rituals don't work. For instance, if you're from a very traditional religious background and you have rituals that are tied up in that, and now you've moved away from that religious background, you're either going to have to reinvest those old rituals with new meanings that still are congruent with where you're at now, or you're going to abandon those rituals and find new rituals, or you're going to be dissatisfied. I guess my argument is that you don't have to be dissatisfied, and you don't have to give up on ritual altogether. I think rather what might be more helpful is to say, okay, these old rituals don't work. Can I rethink them? Can I reboot them? Can I reinvent them? Do I need to throw them out the window and make up something new? Whatever it works for you, we have to do it. And certainly rituals work in communities. Not to say there isn't a communal aspect to it, but particularly as into adulthood, we all to some extent choose our community. We have, of course, we're the people that, that live on our street, that live our neighbors, and there's some that you don't choose, but for the most part, it's how we spend our everyday lives, who we work with, who we go to school with, who we socialize with. We have a lot of power of self-selection. And so based upon that power, I think it also means that we have the power to choose to engage with people whose rituals, way of living, their even routines are ones that are compatible with ours. And that we may sometimes need to stretch ourselves, grow to engage with people very different than us. But I would say that some of the power of this kind of creative ritual making is that we can still engage in community even. We're not stuck by ourselves, but we may have to be creative in how we find it. A good phrase on this author I love, Armistead Maupin, famous author. One of the, he was one, I think maybe the first mainstream author to write about the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s, and just a powerful, powerful author. He's written a whole series book called the Tales of the City books that are just fantastic. But in his book, one of his key characters, a woman named Anna Madrigal, and Anna Madrigal is just a huge character throughout these books, a matriarch of this loose-fitting group of people that she calls her logical family. And she contrasts this with her biological family, the people she was born with, that she's blood kin to. She says her logical family are the people that that you actually do connect with. And I really like that term a lot. And so that's part of the essential element when it comes to this kind of ritual, is that sometimes, particularly those that you want to have in a communal context, you got to find your own family. Okay, I have another good comment here from Serena Blaze. She says, I think you can have a ritual that is regular, like a daily cup of coffee while watching birds at a feeder. Just for a few minutes can set you for the day. For myself, I like a regular routine, and when the regularity doesn't happen, it's upsetting, and I realize how the routine or ritual has real meaning for me, if that makes sense. I agree. What I like about what she's described here too is that these are routines, these are rituals that made other people like, oh, that's just what someone does. For her, it has meaning. But part of what gives it meaning is when it works for her, number one. Number two, she endows it with meaning. In other words, she's saying, having this cup of coffee while watching the birds of the feeder, having these few minutes to myself sets me up for the day. Those things do, and yet in another sense, it's the intention setting. It's the saying, I am endowing these routines with meaning, makes them actually have the meaning, which I think is a kind of an interesting idea, that it is our actions, our intentions that bring about the meaning. So anyway, okay, and we'll see if there's any other comments here, any other questions anyone has on today's topic. One thing I would like to throw out there is, if you have some thoughts or particular rituals or events you'd like to consider crafting rituals for, would like help in crafting ritual for, we'd love to hear from you on that. There's a lot of different possibilities out there. And over time, one of the things we'd like to build through the Objector Church is having a whole library of rituals from a variety of traditions, some that might be more universal in nature, some that may be more culturally, religiously specific, but that could be used by our members and our friends who are looking to craft their own rituals. And so one of the ways for us to build that up is having an idea of what people are drawn to. So also, I want to mention real quickly that if you do want to learn more about our church, our website is objector.church. There you can find all of our past episodes. The video archives are there. We also are in the process of transitioning and having everything available as audio download as well through podcasting. So all of that's coming. Still some things we're working on, but it's getting there. So, well, I think we're going to close out for today unless we have any other comments or questions. I'm checking one more thing first. While I'm doing that, I do want to mention, just a reminder, that we are still doing the Objector Registry. This is really taking off. We're having a lot of people signing up for this. You can find out more about this at objector.church/registry. This is something that anyone, whether you're of ages that were traditionally drafted or not, should do, for a few reasons. One is that we never know who might get drafted in the future. They may change the ages pretty dramatically. They very likely will draft women based on established case law if a draft is ever called. There's a danger, very real danger, of a special skills draft, of people being drafted not because they fit a certain age range, but because of the skills they have. And so no matter who you are, how old you are, what your gender is, you need to do the Objector Church or Conscious Objector Registry. You can find that at objector.church/registry. And then after you do the registry, encourage other people in your life to do the same. Again, particularly teenagers and young adults, but really it really is for everybody. We urge you to do this. This is important. It's also, I will say this is important because we want to send a message to the U.S. government. If they think about doing a draft, you have thousands and thousands of people who have already gone on record saying, we are post-war. We will not participate. That has to be a factor. And so we'd like to have that pressure be building as time goes by. So also want to mention there's some information on the website of Courage to Resist, and the website is couragetoresist.org. There's some good information there, including about some of the discussions about the possibilities of a U.S.-backed coup in Venezuela and why it's important to be organizing against this. And on a lot of different other topics. So all of that is at couragetoresist.org. And I also mentioned Courage to Resist is important to us because this really a big part of our DNA is the Objector Church. We are proud to be the fiscal sponsors of Courage to Resist, and a lot of our members are actively involved in Courage to Resist. So I encourage you to check that out. Okay, I'm going to check one last thing for, oh, we have some more comments. Let me read through these real quick. By the way, I'm so thrilled to have these comments. It's wonderful. Okay, Rebecca says, I think a lot of the things we tend to classify as ritual in a Western culture involve community, but Serena's description is a more Eastern approach. Amanda then commented, she said, thank you. I like how you point out the intentionality and endowing of meaning as a distinction between routine and ritual. Also, Jeff commented on here. He said, happy to be here. My Sunday evening ritual of checking out the Objector Church. And that's true. And I have to admit, I've enjoyed doing these webcasts because it's a ritual. And it's something that to me is creative and enjoyable and encouraging. So it's a ritual for me too. Okay, I have another good comment. This is from Rebecca. She says, meaning more centered on self and capable of being done in a solitary situation. Other practices like meditation and yoga and mindful walking can be a very deep, meaningful ritual. Okay, I think, let me back up a little bit. I think she was referring to, okay, she was talking about Rena's approach. So Rebecca said she was the Eastern approach is meaning more centered on self and capable of being done in a solitary situation. Practice like meditation, yoga, and mindful walking. Okay, so that's a very good point, is that these rituals can mean very different things. And I've talked a lot about these communal rituals tonight, but these individual solitary rituals can be really meaningful too. And I think here the key, again, though, is intention. What do we do with them? And to me, I think it's really, I know people that, well, I'll just compare, say, a yoga session with maybe just some other kind of exercise. And I've done both kinds of group exercise. I'm not a big group exercise person myself, but I will say that yoga has had a different effect for me than, say, a cycling spin class or something, because of the intention. Because in yoga, there's this intention of directing energy and of being fully present and of being present with your breath as you're doing the exercises in a way that some other kind of class or something that maybe in a group setting didn't. Again, the key here is intention. It's still exercise. I'll give you another example to me of something that's been meaningful to me as a ritual kind of thing. And there's times in my life when I rode my bike every day in a commuting kind of way. I'd have 3-4 miles each way to ride. And over time, that became not just a routine, but became a bit of a ritual. I had certain things I did to get the bike ready. I got on the bike, but once I was on the bike, I did my best. I learned that I was happiest, had a better day when I would try to be very present on the ride, meaning I was focused on the weather around me, how the wind felt as I was riding, the terror of the poor squirrel that ran in front of me, and thankfully I didn't hit. All these in the moment stuff that in the car you kind of just blows right by. You don't get to experience fully, but in a bicycle you do. But even then, what I learned is that you have to put intention even on the bicycle, even though you're surrounded by the elements, the weather is more present, it's hard to be absent. It's still, you can get into a routine. Jeff, who's with us tonight, he rides more than anyone I know, and I'm sure there are times it just gets to be a routine for him. But the more we can break out of that, and yes, it's still a routine, but we are engaging with it with meaning, with purpose, allowing ourselves to be present in that moment, some really cool things can happen. Okay, well, I think we've had a lot of good conversation. I thank everyone for joining us. If you have other thoughts after this, please feel free to post them here on Facebook. Also, I always love input. Shoot me an email at james@objector.church. Finally, if you liked what you've heard, I want to encourage you to do two things. First of all, tell a friend. Share this link. The video on Facebook will be viewable immediately. We'll have on our website, we'll have a slightly edited version, video and audio, probably up to some of them tomorrow. Encourage you to share this with others. Secondly, think about making a donation. And the key here is just that we are operating on a very low budget. A few bucks can make a big difference. So go to objector.church/donate. So, oh, we got one more comment. Amanda says, yes, I've recently started an evening bath routine, and I found that it's become more of a ritual. It's time I spend reflecting on my day and my feelings. It helps my mental and emotional well-being. The other night I skipped the bath and I had an awful time sleeping. I really like that, of rituals that can be focused on self-care. And I have to say, I need these kind of rituals in my life. That's a real, it's easy sometimes for me to get to think about rituals that may have some kind of religious or spiritual or mystical interpretation. But sometimes I forget just the basics of self-care and why it's important, and having rituals to do that and value that, I think, is a really awesome life-affirming thing. So thank you so much for sharing that, Amanda. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and close out for tonight. Thank you again so much for tuning in. Look for us same time, same place next week. Adios and bye now.